think it's going. Now it's definitely going. I heard the beep. We had a bunch of different things on our like to talk about list, and I moved up to today. You know, of course, without telling you.
That's all right.
That's something I learned from my clients. Is what you do is change the requirements, change the expectations, and then wait for somebody to give you something, and then wait a little bit after that, and then tell them, hey, this is wrong. Why didn't you do the thing that I never mentioned, never said anything about, but was an expectation I put in my own head 4 weeks ago? You gave me a deliverable 3 weeks ago. I did nothing on it for 2 weeks until I came up and said, hey, how come this is terrible? No, it's what you wanted. Well,
that happened to me with a paycheck. I've turned in my timesheet, and they looked at my timesheet for 2 weeks and said, we're not going to pay you. You didn't tell us what job sites you worked on. I'm like, I've been here 6 months. I never had to do that.
Yeah.
And it was I moved out of my training period where I was working with someone else, right? And I was working on my own. And looking back now, I can see that's what they meant, right? And that because they knew where Dave was. But I'm like, you sent me to every job. I don't know what they were. It was 2 weeks of them. That's like what, 14 or 10 days of different job sites, 3 or 4 job sites a day. I don't know. I just went there.
You didn't have work orders for every job site you went to?
No. She just, you know, I mean, it was a small company. There were 4 people, right? There were the two owners, Dave and me.
Oh, well, come on. They should have just known what you were up to at that point.
It was like, I mean, they literally sent me on every job. So I'm like, you know where I was. Like, well, no, you don't have it on your thing. We're not going to pay you. And I'm like, well, fine, I'm leaving. I'm done.
Yeah, really. Like that's kind of not cool. And by kind of, I mean like really not cool.
So it's the same thing our clients do now, right? They just change those expectations on you. And
it's like, oh, hey, I have one of the things that I go through that's pretty uncomfortable every time is, you know, you start off working with a casual gig. You know, I need some, like, oh, I need some help with blah. I'm like, oh, I can help you with blah. But you don't want a serious thing. You know, this is like maybe the phase before somebody gets a fractional CTO. Right now, what they need is just like a power user. You know? Right. But I think that's what they used to call them, a power user.
Yep.
They just need a power user to come in and like, you know, help me get my DNS dialed in. I don't know. I bought this domain on GoDaddy. Help me do this. Oh, I want this. Can you help me? I said, oh, I'll help you build a little prototype of something. I don't want it to go live. I'll help you prototype something. Hey, we can't go live with this ugly shit. Right. But again,
it's a prototype.
I said prototype. Like the thing I wrote you, the emails all said prototype. And now you're telling me that you have a sales guy and he's trying to sell this and he thinks it's ugly and also thinks we can't sell something ugly. Okay, putting all that to the side for a second. Number one, you skipped some lean process where you did all this customer discovery shit before you started writing code or before you had me start prototyping. Then your next mistake was saying the prototype is equivalent to the thing that I spent more than 0 seconds of design on. I mean, to be fair to myself, if I spend 0 seconds on design and I spend 60 minutes on design, it'll still look shitty.
It'll still be bad.
That's not me, right? You gotta have a guy. You're a girl. Somebody. You got to get somebody to take care of that business for you because
that is an expert role. You need an expert to come in and do that. They can do it quickly and efficiently because they know how to do it. Just
doing that, right? Who's it? We got some when I was still in Seattle, man. There's a HCI, Human Computer Interaction course at the University of Washington. And I'm telling you, graduates coming out of that program are not all of them are great because that's just not how the universe works. But I had 0 bad interns.
Yeah, our digital media degrees out of UCF here in Orlando are like that. Like everybody I've ever worked with that came out of that program, they knew what they were doing. They knew how to do it good.
Like, yeah. Didn't know how to tell the salespeople that it takes time to figure that stuff out. But I feel like, spend a little more time.
That's not something they teach in college.
No, it's like spend a little more time, explaining to a person who is motivated to not understand what you are saying and get them to understand it. No, I want to ship this yesterday. Okay, but we should do this. Maybe we should A/B test it. Maybe we should actually ABC test it. Maybe we should do, here's the thing. Well, we can just change it later. Oh dear me. Why is it that every single time the salesperson is like, oh, we'll just change it later? I don't know if you get this, but when you wiggle stuff around in the user interface, folks get mad. Yep. Especially if you're like, hey, we got to do a whole rewrite. We got to do a whole new UI refresh. Please don't do that. Please just iterate a little bit to a new UI. Slowly get there. You can do it. It's tedious. Wiggle a little bit of time. Add a little bit more color over here. Move this. And now everybody gets one minor change a week for the next 36 weeks.
Right.
Oh, man, your site looks so cool now. When did you change it? I've been changing it when you weren't looking. You were looking, but you didn't notice because it was ever so gradual, right?
Made small improvements.
Let's do this.
And some of those are massive changes. They move a button, and you're like, I can't find my button. But at least they only moved the one button right now.
That's right. Everything else is great. I'm only 1% angry about this.
Exactly.
If you move 2 buttons, I don't go 1% angry and then 2% angry. It affects itself in a compounding way. So if you move 3 buttons, I'm like 1, 2, 8. It's increasing like logarithmically or at least geometrically.
And you need to think about like how actively your users are. You're using this product and this tool every day. You're looking at this interface every day. Are your users, do they come to this once a day or do they come to it once a month?
Oh, yeah.
Right? You got to figure out what your typical user pattern is.
Well, that actually sort of brings us to what I wanted to move up here on the top was Syslog and structured logging. We've chatted about it before regarding Prometheus, Grafana, Loki, tools like this. And we use another one on the web apps. There's another little logging tool. I got a Google Analytics or a Matomo. Both of those are reasonably good products and allow you to attach nice little things onto all of my buttons. So, for example, we added this button because somebody thought it was going to be a cool thing to add. So we add the button. How many people are viewing this? Oh, I need a new view of the data that shows me this stuff. Okay, we'll make you a new view in the app. But, this is my job. Put that in there. Well, let's put some instrumentation in there is what the nerds say.
Telemetry.
And therefore, I also say, oh, yeah, we're saying instrumentation. You got to instrument your apps. Got to add telemetry. Back in the days, by which I mean like 100 years ago, it was you got to do logging. Right. And I don't know, Syslog solved all of my problems. It didn't at all. Right. But
it was the tool we had, and it was the place we could dump data.
Right. I mean, it's still very, very good. It's fast and it doesn't get in the way. Yep. I've seen some bespoke logging mechanisms where folks are like, oh, I'm going to write my logging data into my same database that's my app data.
Right.
Okay. I'm at a maybe on that one. But then you got folks in their apps, and then maybe their ORM that does some magic that they're not fully aware of, and it's putting everything in a transaction. So you're trying to do some multi-step activity and have logging in it. And then it shits the bed for maybe normal reasons. By the time it gets all the way this far in the logic of the code, it says, oh, you're going to oversell your inventory and we don't let you, or you're not allowed to assign that the color green or whatever nonsense. Throw an exception or whatever error mechanism your framework, language, etc. has. Well, the transaction aborts. But the 3 different statements that were logging what was trying to happen, that could help you even debug why it got to this point, those are all missing now too, because your DB has rolled back everything. And I use a lot of PG. PG doesn't do sub transactions. You're in one or you're not. And that's it. So, you know, I like some of that idea, but I feel like in database logging is for app level events that the user would want to consume.
Yes.
Like there's an event that this product's name was updated by this particular user with this timestamp.
Right.
That makes total sense in there, but probably also barfing out a little bit of data across Syslog or something else. Syslog, right? You just write text. You don't have to. You can, JSON is text.
Yep.
So you can actually do that with Syslog. And I'm going to tell you in 2025, I still love Syslog. You know, I'm still using the shit out of it everywhere because I set my severity level on my log right there. And then I write the message. And Syslog is just datagrams.
And it's non-blocking.
That's right. You're just barfing a datagram to some Unix socket, or you're barfing some datagram out UDP, which is like the cheapest thing that I can think of to do. I feel like barfing data out UDP is cheaper and faster than anything going to even a disk.
We once prototyped an HTTP over UDP implementation.
That's nonsense.
Yeah. Yes.
You want a stream socket.
We were trying to eliminate the three-way handshake because that's expensive. In many cases, it's expensive.
I mean, I'm not saying that it's not, but I still think putting.
But we used it for logging, where we were shipping logs over HTTP, right? So if we could build an endpoint without changing everything.
Okay, why are you shipping logs over HTTP?
Because that's the existing interfaces. I mean, it's what you already had the tooling for. And because this needed to be an authenticated, blah, 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 endpoint for all of the things, right? And publicly exposed.
What the hell are you thinking, man?
Well, think about trying to get a log out of your mobile device.
No, that's too difficult.
Or think about it, trying to get a log out of your PlayStation.
Oh, okay. So now you're talking about a weird scenario. You want telemetry from some gizmo that is way the hell away from your control.
Applications aren't always just
and on some network that is ridiculous, right? Because it's on my double natted Wi-Fi in my dorm room or something ridiculous, right? And I got a NAT out of my building to the corporate campus, and I got a NAT out of the corporate campus onto the larger internet. And if you're throwing UDP packets out there on port 514 or whatever Syslog really is, like going from memory, probably not going to catch a lot of that data.
Yep.
But in my controlled universe, where I've got stuff in 2 or 3 data centers that are mostly on the same continent, and I VPN'd them all together with, you know, world's best VPN, WireGuard, no affiliation, but holy crap, is that thing good. And then I'm just barfing my syslog out from my, you know, I'm a Debian guy for, you know, corp deployments. Out of the box, I think it comes with like R syslog.
R syslog D.
Which I never bothered to like learn the configs for or anything. And so I immediately wipe it and I pick syslog NG, which is one I picked 15 odd, maybe more years ago. Said, oh, look at this. Had a really nice thing. Why did I land there? Brain, come on.
It had good advanced configurations that a lot of stuff other
it wasn't
syslog D didn't have. I mean, and it was the good tool of the time. I suspect.
I'm going to my old webpage, and here's why. You could do these internal sources and external sources. And so you would say, oh, I'm going to make an external source, listen on my IP address, port 514. I did guess correctly. And then you do these little destination maps. So you would construct these basic blocks, and then further down you would have the log construct that says this source, this source, this source. And then this was the magic shit in there, was you had where is it? Destinations, configuring filters. And you had these little functions that were just like, oh, if your facility is auth or your facility is cron, or in my universe, my app does the user level logging, right? You could get log user 0 through user 7 or something like this, right? So I just pick user 7 and say, oh, my apps all open. You know, Syslog is so easy to use from like any dang code base at all. Somewhere in there, you say open log, where you're just kind of passing parameters to what the syslogger is supposed to do, but it doesn't actually open really anything.
Right.
Like you don't open a thing on UDP.
You just
sort of do, but you're not making like a stream connect. You're just like allocate a file handle. Very, very cheap right now.
It's not a validated connection. You can you can open a socket to UDP and open a socket to a UDP server and send traffic. You never get an acknowledgement that it arrived. Right. That's the point.
Datagrams is what they called it back when I was sort of paying attention to these kinds of things in schoolish, which I didn't really go to a lot of school, but you know, I've read a couple of books. And this was the thing that was really damn cool in Syslog that made me pick Syslog in G, which I can't see when I wrote this stupid document. Created August 11, 2005. Oh, gosh. Okay, so that's how long ago I picked Syslog. That's 20 years, bro. Anyways, it let you do a source and destination mapping or source and target mapping. And so you'd have all your clients would just say, all sources, destination is the other Syslog server. And so now all of my nodes are pushing all my data, UDP, but whatever. Processes are barfing data and datagrams into the Syslog. Syslog is barfing datagrams across the network over here. If my network is too damn busy, I miss some log packets, you know? Okay, rough, but all my apps still works tidy, and I don't have a very weird circumstance where my transaction aborts and I don't get any logs at all. Yuck. But on the way in, and those filters, you could basically write a filter is run this filter through a pipe. And then you end up with the functional equivalent of like a Perl script that's just like reading standard in line by line while FH or while standard in regex the line and do something. Either change it and send it back out or erase it.
Process crashed. I can send a notification or I can go and execute something. I can call another API. There's lots of options to do with it. If some of them are bad, but you can do them.
Yeah. Oh man, like you could rig all kinds of nonsense with Perl in the middle of your syslogging stream on the destination syslog server, and I was doing entirely too much of that at that point for the bullshit I was working on. I wrote this other tool ages ago called WinlogD. 2005, I still did a lot of Windows related stuff. WinlogD was like a piece of crap C software that I wrote, excuse me, that would take the Windows event log and send it out over Syslog. And there was some damn thing in there that bothered me a whole bunch about it, which was if you read stuff too fast from Syslog, something like this, you would miss an event log message. There was like some weird gap, the way that you had to like poll or the way that you would catch that stuff. I'm staring at my old page where I wrote that, but I don't see it. Again, we're going back to 2004. Holy doly. Anyway, in my controlled environment, Syslog's great. All my languages all have a facility for it. It's cheap and easy. And then the point I started to make 5 minutes ago before I blathered too much was the filtering happens on my logging server and can do nice stuff, including, everything that's notice or info, just like throw that away and only catch me the other stuff. Everything that says log debug, I'm not in dev mode, throw that in the bin. We don't care about it. And, you know, the other part.
It's cheap to ship because it's non-blocking to a certain extent. There's always queues. There's always things in the way. But for the most part, you can
kernel level stuff.
Ship your info, ship your debug, ship your criticals. You can just leave them on and choose on the logging server to say, let me turn on debug. I don't have to go out to all of my applications and say, turn on debug. I can do it at my logging server. And because it's so cheap to send, because it's UDP, because it's non-blocking, that it's mostly never a performance blocker. Now the way you write your code, the logic that writes the code that writes the log might be overly ridiculously expensive, and which is an optimization you need to do in your application. But sometimes you don't have the ability. You don't even own the application.
I mean, that's sort of how the WinLogD project came about, was because we didn't own some of the stuff that we needed, and it was emitting data into Windows Event Log, which is what you're supposed to do when you're in the Windows universe.
Sure.
But this environment has loads of BSD and Linux universe, some Mac in the universe,
yep.
But these Windows things in the universe that are doing their special stuff, and we want to capture it. So that's how that whole thing came about. And then back to your point about leaving the logging on all the time. That's what I'm doing. Like, that's what I like to do. I mean, I don't know. I spend some time getting into the guts of software that other people have written with varying levels of skill set. I can always tell when someone's better than me because that's most of the time. But you slide into these apps and they're like, they've got some logging structures, and it's like right there in the app code is like a switch statement off of the current log level. Switch log level, case 1, do this, case 2, do this, case 3, do this, possibly even different logging levels. It's like, what you can do is just have it say syslog notice some data, and then if you have something else, make another statement, another function call, syslog log debug, some other more detailed piece of data, and then you don't have to change environment variables to get your logging level to change. You don't have to maybe recompile or build or one of those other kinds of package and deployment kind of steps. When you go from nodes that are misbehaving in a centralized logging server, and you're talking about, I have a very verbose app that logs a whole lot, on the service that it's running, on the server where it's running, that syslog just sets up a little filter that says throw all log debug into the bin. So none of that's even getting across the wire to the central box. But then your central box catches something that's at like warning or error or something. Like, yep, what the crap is going on? You see what node it came from. You slide over to that other node, change, like with a simple command, change the filter for that node's logging, and now it's capturing all of the log debug. You can even do something crazy and stupid like, for this node, everything normal, send it across the wire. Everything debug, just write it to a file on my own disk here. And then you can see what's going on. And like, that was super, super easy. But all that stuff that was text logging, that sucked to parse.
Yep.
And I don't know how many different things you've seen there, but loads of stuff where somebody's like, I have my pick your favorite language of the day in 2004 and 2005 when I was spending a lot of time on this logging problem.
The first structured logging we ran into was Wealth.
Wealth? What the hell is that?
Web engine logging format or something like that, right?
No, I don't know.
It was the common of its era, right? So this is early 2000s. So this is pre-2005. So and
you type it was the internet. That is, you don't find anything about that. I'm gonna share.
Yeah.
This is talking about the House of Wealth. What is this? Some kind of Star Trek? Oh man, it ain't even Star Trek. It's a European dynasty. Wealth.
I think it was Wealth.
Logging format. There's one in Apache all the time that's called.
Yeah. It was from Web Trends.
Here it is. Wealth logs, man. How old is this article?
Because Web Trends was the de facto standard for processing web server logs. And so Wealth was the structured logging format that it used to
plain text. I mean, I'm looking at a sample right here. I hope you can see the screen, and it dates itself right here. The example is using the year 2000, and I hate this date format. What do you mean 1-digit month and 1-digit day? What? You could have put those extra 2 bytes in there. It's no big deal. So, and they're doing, basically, it looks like they're doing key value pairs with an equal and quoted strings on one side if there's white space. Easy peasy. Not as tight as, is this a typo? It says proto equals HTTP, source equals some IP address, then it has DST, destination, space that. I think there should be an equals in this thing.
It could be. I haven't actually tried to build processes around this for a long time.
I mean, this document is probably 1,000 years old that they've written. If the example date in here is from 2000.
It actually works both. So all of the fields, by the way, or at least that field, and source and destination fields can have equals or not have an equals.
Oh, look,
both ways.
It has it.
And I think that's a backwards compatibility, either because of a bug or because of one platform that wrote it that way or something like that.
This might be one of those specs that backed its way into being a specification.
It did, exactly.
We were doing this. This guy over here and these folks over here is doing it very, very similar, not exactly. And then they said, oh, well, what we'll do to make the happy thing is we'll just make both of them, both crappy ways of doing it.
WebTrends was the Google Analytics of its day. It was the common tool that was used to figure out what your web servers were doing by looking at their logs.
WebTrends enhanced log file format.
There it is.
And then later it was like common log file or something like that was one of the configs.
The Apache common file. Common format,
everybody else. But that was really just for web server logs. That wasn't for my app. That wasn't for some other.
So Wealth started to get used for application logs because it had structure. You could bake some additional stuff into it. Okay. You could extend it. You could extend it fairly easily because it was just key value, right? And so if you were parsing it, you could extend it for your own use. You could build processors within your own processor because everything started to support WebTrends log, the Wealth format. So all the other log processors and analytics engines would do it. And so when we used it for our firewalls, right? We had the option to do all of our firewall logging using Wealth format because then anybody's WebTrends processor could extract the data from it and use it. And it was okay. I mean, it wasn't great, but it was human readable, unlike JSON logs.
Well, here I'm scrolling through some stuff that's barfed off from one of my machines that's still tightly Syslog designed.
Yep.
And you can see actually this one is a Syslog collector, and I have Syslog formatted so it just writes in a directory that's year and month, and then I just put the files basically in there as the service names. And you can see none of these are structured. They start off with the timestamp that it's getting emitted,
and all that's pretended by your that's all added by your logger and then your log server.
This is from the logger. This is from the logger.
Yep.
This is coming in from the apps layer, knowing it's PID, but this host name and stuff like this. And then this is all from the. This is part after that colon, after the first colon. That's not part of the colon, that's part of time, is generated by the program. This little prefix right here, all of this stuff is generated by Syslog, either at the remote end that gets it to send here or this one when it's barfing the data out. And none of this is structured. It's lines of text. And one of the ones that's
structured, that log statistics one right there was structured.
Log statistics. Blah equals blah equals blah. Oh yeah. So this is syslog ng, sort of writing something that's structured.
So this is one of the things I wanted to talk about logging, right? We use logging for a lot of different purposes. Here we're using logging for metrics.
This is a log of metrics,
right? We use log. If you look through here, we'll see logs for audit logs.
Well, here's my connection rate from Postfix talking about some stuff that's interesting.
And so we use it for audit logs. We use it for metrics. We use it for telemetry, which is
like, here's the guy trying to sign in and failing.
Right. You know, which is your core analytics data in your application is arguably telemetry, right? Someone clicked this button.
Yep. That's
right? I want to know how many times the button was clicked. And I want to know, sometimes I might want to know how many times did this user click this button or a button, right? And so all that type of analytics is process analytics. That's telemetry. How hot is the temperature of my coolant in my engine, right? That's telemetry. And telemetry is kind of a broad concept, but when you can boil it down to very specific pieces of data, that tends to be telemetry. But we use it for all these different things. But audits, for instance, audit data, compliance required audit data is critical. And it probably shouldn't be logs, because logs themselves should be lossy. It should be okay to lose them.
Well, I think that's where you would get stuck with I want telemetry, I want audit logging, I want app layer logging, right? And I feel like maybe that's where that mistake of air quotes mistake, by the way, because it's not necessarily, right? Always a trade-off. But the writing a log of an event into the database in the same transaction that is updating the primary records, like think about your accounting system, right? I update ledger number 1, I update ledger number 2, I update the journal, I update an account balance, and then I emit something into log event that says, oh, on April 25th, David Busby set the, added the transaction to,
that's an audit trail right there.
Yeah. So that gives, I do logs for some stuff that's very important in the database for the apps. I'm also doing that where it's part of the transaction, but if the transaction doesn't succeed in the database, the log of that event and the log of what is being audited doesn't really matter. Right. But also emitting stuff in Syslog. I'm trying to.
There should be a log that says
to make this ledger. I'm trying to make
a transaction failed.
Well, there's also that.
Right. That's a log and that could even be a telemetry emit, right? That says just a counter of a transaction failed, a transaction of this type failed, a log message that contains the why it failed, what I tried to do and what failed. That's a log message, right? Yep. Those are really critical when we're debugging, but if we lose half of them because we're at scale and chaos is happening, it's okay. We got half of them. That helps. That gives us enough to debug, right? But you're auditing to say that I wrote this transaction out, this critical transaction, and that says I did this thing, this person did this thing. This is why at this moment in time the database looks like that. That's your audit trail. And that's where, because the reason for that audit trail is if someone comes along and manually changes data or changes data through, you have the record. If you find that data doesn't match your audit trail, someone's manually manipulating it, which is a problem. That's something you would discover. We don't have tools at this level to try to detect that, but at least we have that audit trail to say these are the things that were supposed to have been done. Also, if we're trying to look at, well, what happened on February or on April 25th at 1:42, I can look in that audit log and see David was logged in and David was doing things through the interface, and we see that. Those are audit logs, right? And you don't want to lose those because those are critical. Those are critical debugging tools or compliance tools. So they probably should be written to a database, a different database with a different transaction and a different thread. But maybe you're right. Maybe they should be in the same transaction because they're only relevant in that case.
You're going to have to make that case-by-case choice, like knowing your app and knowing the things you want to do.
Knowing why you're doing audits.
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize this. Like you could write your log audit and log event and your telemetry. You could write all of that through Syslog. Mm-hmm. But that's messy. And then structured logging would help. I did do a little thing here, like, what is structured logging? You're not even going to believe this, but it's logging data that's structured. you know, and it looks like loads of people are just packing their JSON in there. That is definitely a pattern I've started doing in some of the app logs where I'm calling Syslog.
Yep.
And in 2004 and in 2014, I was writing syslog log_notify and then putting some text in there and maybe doing key value pairs or something like this.
It's a schemaless data structure that we can, I mean, you know, the data structure itself has no schema. It's just whatever you put in there, but you define your schema. And as long as you know what you're in and you're out, you know what it was when you wrote it or you debug it, then it's flexible. So your parsers are common. There's lots of common tooling. When you're doing these space delimited bullshit logs like we did, you've got like what you said. Well, I have to go to the first colon. No, I have to go to the first colon after the colon's in the timestamp. Assuming there wasn't a colon in a process name, by the way.
No, bro. Some of the log analysis things that I was doing way back then, and I'm not even joking with you. Perl was the cool shit in 2004, so don't judge me. And it was like some Perl script, and Perl didn't have a switch. And you were doing these regex matches. And so it was basically like a Perl script with
the whole reason to use Perl is for regex
conditions. Yeah, 100 ifs of do you match this weird thing? Go this way. And so we had an intern come in too who was very new to writing code, and had them come in to work on optimizing that whole script. And what I mean by like optimizing that whole script is because you don't have a switch, plus you're also trying to switch off a regex match. In some cases, also capturing stuff. You know, we were able to have this intern come through and basically add a counter to each of those so we could keep track of which ones of these are triggering more frequently than the others, right? So I'm not putting that if statement early and having the one that doesn't occur very frequently get evaluated, and then also go through and take out all of the capture on the test match. And then once you're into the routine to handle that specific pattern, then do the capture match. It made a little bit of a difference. Well, we also are talking about telemetry. What's this? Google Cloud has their own. It's also JSON. Look at that. How exciting is it? Feel like JSON is the right answer for lots of stuff. But you're also mentioning telemetry and how we could do syslog or even your own app's log events and log audit kind of mechanisms and whatnot. And telemetry, let's see, hold on. Where does Prometheus fit into this equation? Where does like...
I mean, Prometheus is a metrics gathering system.
Okay.
Right? I mean, it's a time series database.
Correct. So, yeah, I use like we have the system, we're using Prometheus, and you get a thing that's called like node exporter, and then that's for the host to emit all of the data to Prometheus in the same way that we used to use SNMP to collect that information. But you can't do SNMP anymore because you don't own enough of the network to make SNMP work on your network. Yep. Okay.
And so no one writes MIBs anymore.
Nobody's, I mean, did they ever want to?
At best, you just had a bunch of OIDs with numbers in them, and you worked off of that because no one ever wrote the MIB for all your custom things. And yeah,
very frustrating. So then I use StatsD in the apps because that's the same damn thing. You're barfing datagrams at something, and it's really just something like counter. You give it a name of the thing, and it fixes everything to like always lowercase, ASCII only, exotic characters, by which I mean anything except an underbar are replaced with that.
Is this a derivation of the old Etsy StatD? Etsy,
oh, yes.
Not Etsy, etc., but Etsy the
Etsy.
Yeah. Those
if you look at StatsD,
I was a contributor to this thing for a long time.
StatsD,
back when the only thing that would consume it, the only thing it could send to was graphite. And
that's
it was an aggregator. So it would take, because you would emit many different statistics, and it could aggregate them to reduce load on your actual metrics, like your time series database, right? So it could send a range of data or whatever instead of having. So it was that aggregator concept.
Yeah, here's the old stats.d from thing, and it's a Node.js dealie,
Yep.
and you send it counters and timers, and you send it over UDP, or at least that's how I do it. But you can do it the other way.
It had a, yeah, it should have
protocol. You give it the name of the thing, colon, the quantitative value, pipe symbol, the type of the thing that you're sending it, either a counter or a graph value or a timer.
Oh, look, there's a comment with my name on it. So,
so the timer, you know, you emit a thing where you, I can't remember if you make 2 events in there. I think you only do 1, and you write the time. But then stats.d is this Prometheus thing. It's written in Go instead of Node, sure, whatever. And then you throw it in there, and it listens, and you barf the data to it, and then it collects all of the stuff for Prometheus to collect on a 10-minute interval or 10-second interval or whatever.
Okay, so it's sort of doing that same thing. It's still It's still an aggregator of the metrics.
Yes. So yeah, that's right. So on my on the nodes I got a node exporter to give me the machine metrics, and then I got stats.d, and the apps are writing into stats.d, keeping track of like the count of how many stuffs happen. I write a gauge, right? You know, oh, I've currently measured the thing, and my free space is 80%. I write 80% into the log, or I've just done 3 transactions, or I've done 3 whatevers. Each time I write one of those, I just write a 1 into the thing. Well, it's going to know that in the 10-second interval, I've sent a 1 in there 4 times. So it's going to know to count like 4 ones, not a graph of 4, but my counter has gone from whatever it is. Now it's plus 4 more, you know, and the number just keeps getting bigger. And then the timer is like, oh, here's my event, and it took 35 seconds or milliseconds, or I think you do a fractional whatever. But then that goes into my Prometheus box, which is like ugly to look at. I don't have a copy of that, but like even with their new UI, right? And we go and look at some screenshots. I said Prometheus, and I get the movie, obviously. Like, what am I, stupid? Here's some nice stuff from LWN. This doesn't look like Prometheus, though. This says a couple of Prometheus screenshots.
That looks like Grafana.
This is Grafana.
Right. Because Prometheus is not a graphing interface. Prometheus is a time series database.
Oh, it has a graphing interface, though.
Did they add a graphing interface to it?
There is some graphing that you can do it there. Let me see if I can.
Native, or, I mean, is it like the old Graphite Explorer? Well, Graphite was the graphing interface, too. So it had both. But it was the graphing interface for Graphite was it was multiple tools all wrapped up in the package of Graphite. I don't remember that, but I haven't spent a ton of time with Prometheus. So
I only spend a little bit of time on it. Let me see if I can't figure out here's my Grafana and here's my Prometheus. One of them has a bad certificate right now. Oh, they both do. Oh, yeah. It's not a bad certificate. It's my certificate. That's what's up. See if it lets me sign in. I'm trying to get into my own Prometheus, but I just can never remember its sign in. I wonder what that was. Well, maybe I will never know what my password is. Unfortunately, I don't care about that stuff that much, or it's not set on this machine, rather. Suppose I should do something about that. Oh, maybe this is my password. That's right. I had to go and look it up. Here we go. Thanks for everybody's patience. This is my Prometheus, and it's a sort of a new, this is like their new UI.
This
And it does one thing. So if I look for like bong incoming 410 execute, and then say graph, maybe I don't have anything there.
So it's a query. It's not a dashboarding interface. It's just a query and dynamic graphing. It's an exploratory interface.
Yeah. So okay, here we go.
That's what like Graphite Explorer does. It's funny how much
this is Grafana. You go in here, and you get all kinds of good stuff. Well, if you pick the right thing.
Right. That's Grafana.
I gotta go way back.
Where you've built dashboards of it.
You do this, you have all these like
figure out your data, figure out your queries, do quick explorations and digs.
This thing only does this, and you can see like you can look at the data as a table. I guess I never do any of that. I rarely use Prometheus except for using it just to collect the stuff.
Right.
You know, you go in and you set some targets. Oh, that's what's happened. I turned all of that stuff off. And then it collects. And then you're like basically super happy about it. And you can get these kinds of charts. But now we're sort of coming to the end of this thing here. But do you run your own Prometheus? Or do you were saying weeks ago or a little bit of time ago, don't do any of this shit yourself?
With teams that I talk to, because they are always extremely resource constrained.
Yeah.
And they also need APM, and they also need metrics, and they also need alerting, and they also need pager rotation management, and they also need logging, and they need all of the things because they're already at scale, right? But they've got one or two DevOps people. They've got a development team of 30 or 300 that those two people are supporting, managing and running and scaling all your collectors, scaling all of, because all of the pieces and components of this yourself is a entire service organization.
You said you needed APM. What's APM? Application performance metrics or something?
Yes, exactly, right? Like, how did my Rails app do? What's running slow? What functions in my Rails app or in my front end app are running slow? Right? These are the things that developers are caring about when they're trying to figure out how to performance tune their application. They're not caring about CPU utilization. But the other side of it is being able to correlate that my log writing function is now our most expensive process, or most expensive function in this user request, right? I can see that. Now, can I correlate that to an increase in CPU utilization in the same tooling? Can I also look at what logs are happening at the same time in the same tooling? If I have to jump through 5 or 6 or 8 different platforms and authentications and user interface styles, that's all expensive to a team. And that's why crap like Datadog and New Relic win the game.
Datadog. New Relic. I remember New Relic. Splunk. Is Splunk still a thing?
It is. I don't know if they branched out past enterprise logging the way I think they do. I mean, and use the Elastic Stack, but of course the Elastic Stack is you should be using the Elastic Cloud now because that's what they're
knack to set up. Trying to figure out AWS, Amazon Managed Service for Prometheus.
Basically, it saves you the running of the servers. It saves you some of the overhead if you want to try to start tying things together. I suspect it's probably heavily oriented toward, because Prometheus in the Kubernetes universe is a first-class component. So this is probably more about, if you're in Kubernetes, then you have to manage and scale Prometheus as well. So this offloads that as a service.
So I think that's what also this Google offering is doing. Managed service for Prometheus. Try it free, blah, blah, blah. I'm just trying to find some pricing, because if you're, what's the trade-off, right? I buy a $10 server, I make some number up.
Sure.
And then I have to spend all my time working on it. And this thing's talking about billions of samples, and monitoring API calls are a penny per 1,000. Here's view pricing details. Observability pricing. Logging retention, log router, log analytics. All of these things are so
the market has supported an increase in prices over the past many years. So what 5 or 10 years ago was able to be done cheap has definitely gotten expensive.
Sure.
And I think that's the problem with this industry. We do have new products come out like Axiom, who are taking a different tack on pricing and the way they scale pricing. And I think that's a good thing. But you know, that all-in-one component infrastructure that says that all of my different teams get one piece to use for this is a very powerful tool, and it's worth it. I mean, I've run the teams that managed this stuff, and you're a part of every day was making sure that our logging infrastructure and our metric infrastructures were online, because without them, development stops. So they're just as important, right? So it's not at a certain scale, it's no longer a thing that you keep online, and if it scales with you, great, and if it doesn't, then you deal with it later. You block a team of 100 developers, and that's expensive.
Now you're hosed.
Right.
Like Grafana says they've got a free one with 14 days of retention. And it has all this stuff, but I'm wondering, like, how do you get it to collect? Am I still running my own?
You're just going to run some sort of agent in all of these cases. You're going to put whether it's an agent that you get and a library that feeds to it, or you're a collector that reads log files or whatever. You're still going to have that integrated at your application server level.
Right.
In all of these cases, right?
Well, I'm already using StatsD.
Right.
I'm already using
Prometheus to a different Prometheus server.
No, I don't point StatsD to a Prometheus server. StatsD is listening on my logging port, but then it also listens on like port 9005, listening and responding HTTP universe. And so Prometheus is the thing that hits my other node over there and then pulls the crap from there into Prometheus.
Then the other way around. If it's a
my app writes to StatsD, Prometheus pulls from StatsD.
That's one of the things I remember about Prometheus now that you say this, because Prometheus is 100% a pull system. It has to be aware of everything that you need to collect, and it then has to go and pull for collection, which is why like you're using StatsD as a pull point instead of having your application be the pull point where it collects from.
Yeah, that's right. I'm going to, like this messy one that I have right here, I have to have these endpoints.
The design with Graphite was entirely push.
Oh man, if you dig down in the history of all this crap, man, every time you start talking about logging on like any project, immediately it's like the conversation is bifurcated into like, well, should we push the logs or should we pull the logs? And the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
You know,
sometimes one, sometimes the other. A good platform should support both.
Well, you can do, I think maybe the platform is the combination of tools. So like in my Prometheus, and Prometheus does have some like service discovery mechanisms. So it's not like every time you change it, you got to go and edit some file. It's smart enough to be able to like pull stuff out of a DNS and a bunch of other stuff for its like service discovery. But then if you're not doing that, you set up all of these targets. And so if I'm picking on like a machine I have in my universe, copper or zinc is a machine I recently took out of my universe. So now my Prometheus says zinc is not behaving, but I was pulling stats off of zinc from port 9102, which is where I get my crap from, I think, Node Exporter. And then I was pulling stuff off of 9100 that was where the stats D stuff and my app writes to. And then I just have to go and pick that stuff up much, much later. And I had to set up, also for all of this to work nicely, I set up a VPN for all of this. I don't want my like metrics exposed to like the wider internet. So the machine that is running the Prometheus has a bunch of DNS fakey stuff into it so that it knows to talk to like, you know, that host name at the VPN's IP address when it says, when you're trying to talk to Zinc. You're not trying to talk to Zinc on its public IP4 or public IP6. You're talking to it on its private IP4. You know, and it pulls and it pulls. And when you add a new server, go to your Prometheus and add it. But that's probably the case on like any of the stuff, unless you have, you know, a magic little system like, oh, I have a new server in my universe. Let me go to that machine.
So, for instance, like for metrics, with the way Graphite stored data, and there were some oversimplifications in the system that led to changes in design, but is that everything you sent is just a string, right? I mean, the identifier is a dotted series of strings. So your host name dot domain name dot metric identifier. And so it never needed to know about anything about the machines.
These were the Graphite Carbon. I remember.
Right. You had Graphite Web, Carbon, Whisper, Carbonite. These were all components of it. And
and Collect D. I remember this guy.
Collect D would sit locally, pull in a bunch of daemon related.
That's what Stats D exporter is. And now I was barfing all of that stat shit into Collect D, and then Collect D would say, "Oh, we're in good shape now," and bundle it into like 10 seconds.
Graphite. But Graphite never needed to be configured to be aware of any servers. It only needed to be accessible for push. I built monitoring systems that worked the same way. So it was always very hard to find any kind of monitoring tooling, active monitoring tooling. Now, metrics are one thing, right? Metrics are just static data that sit in a database and you choose to do something. You might have a monitoring system that looks at data and monitors based on that event and says, I see that CPU went high, but that's not your actual metrics collection system or even your graphing system. That's a function of something, maybe one of those, but it's a different.
Then you have because like that was what's going on.
But when we talk about like monitoring a server or a application and say, is this responding? Is this responding in a reasonable amount of time? Right. One of the things that we did is I built a entire layer that would push the configuration from the server, from the application to the monitoring system, because all of the monitoring systems were all built around pre-configuring them. And the typical pattern was your config management system would have to run and rewrite all of the configs for your monitoring system before something would come live. So in Big Brother, or in Zymon, the thing that replaced Big Brother, it had a dynamic listener that the BB client could communicate to the BB host without any other knowledge other than the client knowing how to get to the host. So I built a listener that would listen to that socket, to that internal socket system inside Zymon, and look for a certain pattern. So when the client would start up, it would send it. I would communicate through that client a configuration. So the server was aware of what configuration it needed, which meant I could bake this into deploys. So a server was sitting there doing nothing. And it would have set up base stuff and say, I'm a server, I'm named this, I have CPU, I have memory, you should monitor for those things. But then my application deployment would come in and make that server something less generic and say, here is a web server for this application. It comes along with these configuration definitions for monitoring. And that lived with my application stack. So it's all first-class native deployment. So when I do a deploy, the application is deployed, it runs, it starts up, its monitoring piece talks to the BB client sends it to the BB server, BB server sees that, writes a new configuration out for it, never having to be like wait for something else to happen, or because your config management tools had to discover that there was a new server, had to be manually triggered or cronly triggered or whatever. Then it had to build it from that, okay, I discovered there's a new server. What's it supposed to be? Where do I get all that information? You had that constant back and forth. So this became a direct configuration path so that it's set up monitoring, and we deploy an application and it's monitored. We deploy a new server with another application, another copy of that application, it's monitored. It was a little bit more complex for the cleanup because, but that's what I like. I like push because I like push in all cases that I can possibly do it. Because otherwise you just end up with a bunch of stale crap.
Right.
Or things that more likely happens, things that aren't monitored because something broke along the I need to dynamically reconfigure my thing chain. It's nice to hear that Prometheus has some discoverability built into it now. But
yeah, so now Logit, I don't know what they do, but they're $12 a month for something that seems reasonable. And then
so they used to run the Elastic stack. They used to be ELK, so you would get the full ELK stack. I loved Logit because they were so cheap compared to everything else back 10 years ago.
Well, this is their metrics. Like I would have to get 2 plans for them now. I'd have to get a logs plan.
Right, because it's different tools. This is ELK.
APM plan. And,
because they're all different tools. They're all different stacks. This is what happens when you bake it into use the open source systems for this.
I mean, I'm happy about that, but this one says I get Prometheus as a service. Hosted Jaeger. What's hosted Jaeger?
It looks like tracing, distributed tracing, maybe?
Telemetry. Sure.
Yeah, distributed
tracing. Okay, well, that's cool. I'm interested in that, but I'm mostly interested in like getting a hosted Grafana.
Well, yeah.
With my hosted Grafana, I can't tell from all this, like if I still get to use my stats D and everything like I'm already using.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Grafana, the company, is doing for that. I know that they've got when they first were doing it, you would still had to point it to your own collectors, right? To your own database. Now that was 10 years ago. They were under a different name at the time. So I don't know whether they're running a Prometheus. It looks like it's a hosted Prometheus. At least this says a hosted Prometheus.
This is Grafana hosted Prometheus. Get in touch with something, because then if I just go over here and I hit price, then it says, "Oh, you've got free and pro," but it's hard to tell. Like,
well, there's billable metric series, right? 10,000 metrics billable series. So if you've got that, then they've got to have some sort of collection and storage, and not just the Grafana graphing interface.
I guess I could get started for free. Create a free account. Might have to give that a shot, because it's a little tedious to take care of your own. And that price point that they were offering here, if you're running your own box and doing all the stuff, running your own box for this is already $10 to $15 a month,
right,
for it. And then you're doing all your other admin work on it. You're doing your sysadmin and then the blah, blah, blah. So at 20, that's not really a big deal.
Yeah, 10 years ago, we were spending I'm pretty sure it was Logit. We were spending about $500 a month for all of our ELK stuff.
Well, I can see that. Look, if you wanted to add your open search into it, you got $100.
And that was ELK, the logging stack, Yeah.
80. And then you want to add metrics and it's another 30. And then you want to add APM and it's another 40. And then your custom plan. But
we were still running.
No big deal.
What was I running for metrics at that point? Because we already had all of the logic and everything for the metric stack, for the monitoring stack, and we had control over it. It was already built and baked, but we were integrating this idea of logging, and so using we didn't want to take ownership of yet another set of tools, especially something as hard, as painful to scale as Elasticsearch. And so that was why it was like, we can just ship this out and let someone else take care of it.
Oh man, I wanted to like click on this to see my 50 curated infrastructure integrations to just sort of like let me know. Oh, look, it has AI. Hot dog. Back in Mimir, Cardinal something. Grafana is doing, this is what Grafana is doing. They make their dashboardy thing, and now they have Mimir and Loki and Tempo and Alloy, these other feature sets.
Yep.
With built-in Prometheus pipelines. But I don't think these guys do Prometheus. Somebody else is doing Prometheus. Cloud free, best suited with 3 active users per month. Start for free, man. I love starting stuff for free. And then we go back to pricing details, which is back to this. So it's like you'd work yourself into $20 a month pretty quick, or or $300 a month pretty quick. And you could kick the tires on $0 a month for probably quite some time. I mean, this is telling me they're giving me 50 gerbils worth of data. I mean, that's a lot. Only 14-day retention, but it's like,
right. If you only have 14 days, 50 gigs is a lot.
I'm not doing 50 gigs of stuff in 14 days.
See, on Tiger, we were doing 4 terabytes a day.
Come on.
You can see why when Splunk came to us and said, "Hey, we want you to spend money with us," and we did the math, and it was like, hell no, I can build a team for way cheaper than this.
Right.
And so instead of building a team, we reevaluated what we were doing with our data and our logs, because we were at threshold, we were past threshold, right? And it was a problem. It was slow. We couldn't get data out of it that we needed to, and we reevaluated that. But we figured out what we needed to ship, where we needed to ship it, what should be a log, what should be telemetry. We built a custom telemetry system because we were saving like a $10 million bill.
Yeah, I mean, that's for like at the other end of the scale spectrum, you know. I mean, when your company is making less than $10 million a year,
right?
Well, now what do you want to do? Spend $300 a month on Grafana, or do you want to, you know, how many developer hours can you buy for $300?
Right, exactly. 3.
Well, I guess it depends on where that developer is, right?
Yeah.
You
so
know,
somewhere between 10,
3 and 1, right?
Yeah, and maybe 10, depending on your
I'm working on a project right now where this has nothing to do with logging, but you know, developer pricing. So my guy's like, "Oh, I got this development team, and they're so cheap," and they are very cheap. Their price is, it's a good price. I'm sorry, I'm not saying it's a good price. That's the wrong set of words. It's a low dollar amount.
Right.
But just yesterday, the day before, ran into some problem on their like build process, which is built off of or was supposed to be going with this thing I put in a README file in their thing. Here's the README. Here's a script that I've written to do your build deploy process. And they've got some Laravel stuff and some NPM stuff and this other toolkit called Vite that needs to run. And they're also using Tailwind because Tailwind is cool. And then we had to extend it a couple of months ago because they wanted to do embedded SVGs for some icons instead of Font Awesome, which they were already using. So now they're using 2 icon stacks. Well, now we've also ended up with, they're using 2 CSS frameworks. They have Bootstrap and Tailwind. Because these lower priced devs were just like, oh, we got to do something with the style. Let's add Tailwind to the mix. It was sort of like you could have just used what we already had there. Well, just recently they were like, the lower priced dev was redoing a utility that already existed. You know, basically replaced deploy.sh with release.sh, which are scripts that functionally do the exact same thing in almost the right order, except glancing at the script, and I've been looking at this stuff for ages, I saw where their bug was. In the Laravel universe, there's a migrate process. Rails has this. Loads of shit has this, right? Oh, I've deployed my app, and now I run db migrate or Rails up or whatever the command happens to be. These guys wrote in their little script to optimize the script, pre-optimization being the root of all evil, that says, oh, after we run db migrate, we're going to touch a file in this storage location. So then they ran into a problem because the user that is running the script is, a user that you're on that machine as, but the process that's running their app, Laravel, PHP, FPM, is a different user. So then they're like having to struggle with the directory permissions to be able to write to this location. Okay, cool. That's another problem because Laravel wants to write to storage logs, blah, with its own magic sauce. So then they have to do that. That was like a problem they were working around. But also they're touching a file in that storage location that says, oh, we've run the migration. Except that Laravel's migrate script says, oh, have you run all the migrations? So you don't really need to do that. You can just very bluntly run artisan db migrate on every deployment of your app. And if there's nothing to do, the script is done in 1 second. And if there's something to do, the script is done in however long it takes to do that shit. And so these cats spent like, according to the bill, spent like 2 hours struggling to recreate a script that already existed, fighting with the permissions to this directory so that they could write there as the on system user rather than the www data or whoever it is that's running the FPM bits. And then introduce the bug where if you run migrate once on that host and they touch that file, migrate never runs again because your little script is trying to outsmart the tool that is already much, much smarter than you. So it's like, oh yeah, these devs are cheap, but you paid for like 3 hours for them to do nothing, actually introduce bugs, but all of it was replicating work that already existed and was documented. This has nothing to do with logging. This just has to do like, what can you get for developer hours? Well, that time you spent 3 hours, you got nothing for it, you got new bugs, and then later we're like, how can we have these bugs? Let me call my guy who's like more pro to come in and look at it. So now you paid for it like 4 times. Maybe, I don't know, maybe you should find devs that read the documentation before they start this. It's like some guy's work cycle is code like hell. Does it work? Yes. Code like hell on something else. No. Code like hell on the same thing. Like, there's got to be, I was at the pub last night chatting with some guys. They were in the band, and then they're done playing, and I like to talk to the band. And then it's common topic, like, oh, so, what brings you here? What, blah, 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 pub chat. They're like, oh, yeah, we write software. I said, how much time you say you write software for a living. How much time are you actually writing software? And how much time are you just like communicating about writing the software or meeting about writing the software or other stuff? And I'm like, really, bro? Like, I feel like you were on stage today playing guitar for longer than you have spent writing code today. and he takes a sip of his beer and he's like staring up in his face and he's like, yeah, I didn't write any code today.
It's just like playing in the band, right? The thing that people see are when you get up on stage, and they never think about all the work that went into getting on stage and doing that.
Oh yeah.
And writing code is the same way. The actual producing of text characters on the screen that save in a file is not the job. It's all the other things.
Yeah, all of the other things. Let me read this stupid email from this person. Let me collect the requirements.
Let me just sit back and expend some brain power solving the problem that we have to solve, whether it's how does this connect to that? That doesn't just happen, right?
When I worked at the bank ages ago, and we were doing new stuff, right? When I worked at the bank ages ago, 2007, 2005, maybe about like 2000, pre-housing crisis. Reverse mortgages were like a brand new product. The bank I was working at, and my mentor over there was like ready to try to build from scratch reverse loan origination and servicing software.
Okay.
Moderately complicated, full of boring rules, full of carve-outs in all the rules for all of the states. Oh, this one has this. You can't do it a reverse mortgage in Texas if they're in a floodplain. Might have just been easier to say don't do any work at all in Texas. The folks who drive the bank don't want to do that. They want that market opportunity. So figure out how to make that stuff go. Do something. Read floodplain data. Do this. Make it automated so the loan officer isn't having to do all this stuff. And so sometimes I'm sitting in my cubicle and I've read somebody's spec on what I got to do, and you just kind of sit there and you're like, looks like maybe you're sleeping. You're staring at the sky. I got my eyes closed. I'm drawing like a picture in my head of this box is connected to this other box, and there's this loop. And then here's where Jeff has to get involved in the process and review something and press a button. And then it's, so I'm having to think. And somebody who's not in the IT department, somebody who's not on the code side of the stuff, comes in and is like, "Oh, I see you're not busy. Hey, I need you to do something." And like, no, this is actually...
This is me being busy.
I was leaning back in the chair, feet up on the desk with a notepad in my lap for when I have like a sort of a brainwave to just draw a little scribble. That's what my job looks like.
Yep.
Your job is talking on the phone to people and smashing the keyboard, sending out emails over and over again, and moving up Post-it notes around for what your team is doing. And everyone can see your work and it's visualized. But I need to do 6 hours worth of work that only exists like in my head and this chicken scratch until it turns into more formed documentation and then turns into the 16 lines of code. You know what I mean?
There was when my wife's dad worked at Bell Labs for a while, and there was a guy at the office. He came in and he did all he did pretty much. Anytime you looked over, he's just sitting there asleep in his chair. That's what it looked like. He's just asleep at his desk, and people would say, "Well, what's this guy do?" Like that. And once a month or so, he gets up and solves a really expensive problem.
That's how you do it. Or at least,
right? Because you've got to think about things. How you think about things, how individuals think about things is different. Some of us put it all in our head. Some of us wander around talking to ourselves. Some of us draw on whiteboards. Some of us sketch it out in code and try things, or we talk to other people. But
I have these little notebooks.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, this problem is like really hairy. And there's a nature trail. I just walk over there a little bit, and there's like a nature trail that maybe takes me, 30 to 40 minutes to walk around it, depending on how muddy it is or how snowy it is or how big the little stream you got to cross, how messy that is, So I get to go out there and like wander around, and you're sort of paying attention to something else. But I take my little notebook and a pen, and then I get out there and I'm like, oh, that was the right answer. And I just like stop for a second and scribble something down, close the book, keep walking.
Yep.
Anyways, I feel like that's a wrap. I'll put the recording off. Oh, right. That button's over here now.